talking. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Poetry is Normal Presents at the Normal Public Library in Central Illinois. But tonight, Poetry is Normal presents Denise Duhamel, who is in Miami, Florida. And so we're so glad that she can be with us tonight virtually here on YouTube Live. We're sad that we haven't been able to meet in person in the library really for a couple of years, but happy that it has opened up the opportunity to have guest poets from all over join us at Poetry is Normal Presents at the Normal Public Library. This program is supported by the Normal Public Library Foundation, and we are very glad of it. It alternates with our open mic, which is in April, National Poetry Month. But in May, in Poetry is Normal Presents, we'll have poets Patricia Clark and Alice Freeman. In July, we'll have the return of poet Justin Ham, who lives in Missouri, but is willing to come back to Central Illinois in person to the library, and we hope that'll all work out in July because he grew up in Central Illinois. And April 19th, our open mic, we'll do in a hybrid fashion. So we'll come to the library for the open mic, but we'll also have a Zoom portion as we've been doing. So if you're listening and you want to participate in our open mic, go to our website and take a look of how to sign up for that. Or if you're local, just show up 7 o'clock on April 19th. But let's get back to Denise. Denise Duhamel, as I told you, lives in Miami, Florida. She teaches at Florida International University there. She has a bunch of wonderful books out, and I want to show some to you. Her latest book is Second Story, and she'll be reading some poems from that and from her book Scald. And I happen to have her book Blowout right here, but she will perhaps read some poems from other special books. And another wonderful thing that Denise does is she writes on her own, but she also does collaborations with other poets, and maybe she'll tell us a little bit about that because we'll leave time for questions at the end. So if you're watching on YouTube with us and you are able to type in any comments or questions, when we have time at the end, we will look at your questions and answer them. For now, Denise Duhamel, it's all yours. We're eager to hear your poems, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you, John, for hosting me. I'm just gonna, sorry, there was something over my face that said unmute myself, so I just did. I hope you can hear me okay. So I know Kathleen's poems because she was the winner of the Patricia Dobler Award in 2019, and I had the pleasure of reading with her last year, and I was a judge for that award, so I know how her poems just rose to the top, and I want to say thank you for those poems, and thank you for inviting me tonight. The first poem I'm going to read is actually in Scald, and I thought, since I don't know everybody here, and people might not know me, I thought it might be a good introductory poem. As you can see, my name is Denise, and this poem is about another Denise. It's called On the Occasion of Typing My First Email on a Brand New Phone. When I sign Denise, autocorrect suggests Denise Richards, which makes my ex-husband Charlie Sheen, which makes me a mother of 3 daughters and sometimes more, as I volunteer to take care of the twins Charlie fathered with his third wife, Brooke Mueller, while she's in rehab. In my new identity, I'm 10 years younger, a lot skinnier, but I haven't read much. In my new identity, I get breast implants so I can be in Wild Things, for which I become pretty famous because of a sex scene with Neve Campbell in a pool. But after that, my acting goes nowhere. Except for bit parts and my now canceled reality show, It's Complicated, which only runs for a year and for which Charlie calls me greedy and vain. Sure, I get to be in The World Is Not Enough, but Entertainment Weekly rates me the worst Bond girl of all time. In my new identity, I still have a sister named Michelle. I'm still French Canadian, raised Roman Catholic. I still get to be a writer, but when I'm Denise Richards, instead of poems, I publish a memoir, The Real Girl Next Door. I'm a New York Times bestseller, but deep down I know it's not because I wield a great sentence. In my new identity, instead of overeating, I get more plastic surgery and pose for Playboy when my marriage heads south and I no longer feel sexy and just want to prove something. In my new identity, my mother has passed, but my father is still alive, going to the millionaire matchmaker to look for new love. Though I'm no genius, I'm generally respected because I don't badmouth anyone, even when I'm on Howard Stern. I repeatedly decline to talk about the restraining order or any of Sheen's public subsequent meltdowns. What's the point? Besides, I need to protect my kids. There aren't many famous Denises, and I wonder why my phone, if it's that smart, doesn't suggest Levertov. When I erase Richards, autocorrect still doesn't recognize who I am. As I try to resign, Samsung asks if I'm sure I'm just a plain old Denise. Might I really mean denies, or maybe demise? So I always ask my friends who they get auto-corrected, and all the Kates get Kate Middleton. So that made me feel a little bit better. Oh, it's crazy. This next poem is called Folkways, and it's from Second Story. And I live, you can't see, but I do live on the second story, and I can see a little bit of the ocean. So this is a poem about that. Folkways. I see the sea getting closer. I read we'll soon run out of drinking water. I floss the steak out of my teeth. I should be vegan. Even the teenager told me so. She said I had the right sandals and earrings. I step off the plane, look up my carbon footprints. Greenland is melting due in part to my recent Google search. All my dead iPhones, along with scraps of bologna and turkey bones, add to the landfill populated by vultures in some countries, child scavengers in others. I buy South American fruit in North American groceries. Sustainability is a hoax, the article says, but I recycle anyway, cycle instead of drive when I can. Emma evacuates Santa Barbara, wildfire in her rearview mirror, a laptop covered in ash, and a few books in her trunk. I say goodbye to my furniture and clothes whenever I evacuate for yet another hurricane, decide what to bring, what to leave behind. My friend's favorite joke, what is the population of Bombay? Wait a second, let me check my watch. When I was young and naive, I had a foster child from Bangladesh. This was before I knew how much the charity's CEO was making. I was an adjunct in New York City with 3 jobs, but knew I was rich by comparison. I could pretend I was a good person. My sanitized love and concern reflected in the drawings the child sent. I started to volunteer instead at the Catholic Worker, ladling soup and oatmeal into plastic bowls. The homeless smelled like I would have smelled if I didn't have running water or a toothbrush or quarters for the laundromat. Eileen Miles slept outside their New York City apartment with the homeless, but was sure not to use any resources the displaced needed. Miles took their own food so that the truly needy could get first dibs on dumpster bagels. Until you have no toilet paper, you can't imagine how precious it is. No tampons or moisturizer or shampoo. I live in Florida now, where a graying man makes his home on the beach. He is a war vet, my neighbors say, but I am not sure which war. There have been so many. He showers where others simply rinse off sand. He waited out Irma in a shelter while I drove away with friends. Now he sleeps near the restrooms in the park and shuffles down to the surf, takes his morning swim. When he catches me leaving him half a roasted chicken, he says, "Thanks for the delivery." He says maybe his luck is changing. Maybe one day soon the ocean will come to him. And this next poem is called The Climate Crisis 2019, and it has an epigraph by Sir Robert Swan, who writes, "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." Climate Crisis 2019. My Uncle Will in his wicker rocking chair, riding the waves. I'm watching him from an almost submerged second-story window. I thought this recurring dream foretold his death, but after we buried him, the dream kept coming. Eventually, I bought a dream dictionary, which said the flood meant I might have pent-up sexual desires. I loved my uncle in a chaste way, so this interpretation made me feel shame, as did the second definition, suggesting my demands were overwhelming, flooding others. Uncle Will was an environmentalist, the first person I knew to get a Vespa in 1970, saying if it was good enough for Gregory Peck and Roman Holiday, it was good enough for him. My uncle thought, even back then, we all should be using solar power. Now, the Florida street upon which I live floods even when the sun is shining. The dream's window was telling me I needed to go out into the world and experience more life, though it's risky to travel through flooded streets, not knowing what's under the surface. Not until today did I think to look up uncle, which the dictionary says might point to the powerlessness, considering the say uncle idiom. So maybe the dream foretold not my uncle's death, but a second story, the impending death of the planet, corporate greed twisting all our arms, hoping we'll admit surrender and defeat. What nags me still is that rocking chair, defined as the wisdom of elders, as comfort and ease, taking us back to when we were sleeping babies, that deep safety, someone else taking care of everything. This next poem is also a bit of an elegy, or not a bit of an elegy, is an elegy, and it's called Poker Hands. The day you left us, you almost forgot to wave goodbye as you followed the anesthesiologist to the operating room, scuffling along in non-skid slipper socks, one of those surgical caps on your head. You were going to a sterile and cold place when Mom said, "Wait a minute, what about my kiss?" You came back and then turned and waved goodbye with both hands, hands that could pull out pies from the oven without potholders, hands that could shovel and make snowballs without gloves. All those years of baking, from the freezer to the proof rack to the ovens, made your hands what they were. Your poker hands, which dealt the cards for pitch and 21. You were serious when you played, tapping the table so we'd pay attention. You had nicks and cuts and burns you shrugged off, just like you shrugged off the surgery. We were so sure you would come around, sore, yes, depressed, maybe. We'd read up on all the side effects of the procedure, but you were ready, fearless, man of Bayer and Vicks, the only medicines you really believed in. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry I was a jerk so much of the time. I'm sorry I was such a spoiled brat. You only bought one luxury your whole life, a leather lounge chair, while I wanted a guitar, a new coat like the other girls, brand name jeans, a bike, and money for the movies. I grabbed everything with my weak hands that turn blue in a cold room, ricochet when the faucet runs too hot, hands that get chapped doing simple things like dishes. Now that you are no longer here, sometimes my hands become your hands, when they are empty and still and grateful, when I fold them to pray the way you did, when I help someone like you helped me the morning I woke up with a hangover after a high school party. You poured me a glass of orange juice and plucked a pickle from the jar and put it on a saucer. The combination worked, our very own father and daughter dance. Soon we went to the airport so I could board my first plane to travel farther than you or Mom had ever been. I stooped Having second thoughts, my Paisley suitcase suddenly too heavy. Mom told me we could turn around, that I could stay home, and you told Mom, honey, you've got to let her go. After the agent took my ticket, I turned and waved, my pudgy fingers, my purple polish already starting to chip. Then I followed the other travelers to the rest of my life, scuffling along in my sneakers, one of your baseball caps on my head. Next poem is called Howl, and many of you will recognize the scaffolding in this poem because I stole it from Allen Ginsberg, and it's sort of an updated howl. I saw the best minds of my generation, i.e. Fauci, Birx, undermined by Trump, doctors hungry for truth, dragging themselves through inane press conferences at 5, trying to fix the Prez's anger. Angels with hip replacements and fashionable scarves holding up graphs, making predictions, scientific dynamos trying to break through to give us lights. Who, in spite of political tatters and hollow men, sat up zooming in the virtual darkness of cold, hard facts, floating across cable news host desks, contemplating death rates. Who bared their brains to the World Health Organization and saw Monday night riots, angels staggering in Lafayette Square, flashbangs illuminating. Who passed by unimaginative reporters with radiant, cool eyes, pleading with Americans not to drink bleach, tragedy among the non-scholars of pseudoscience. Who were expelled from news conferences by a crazy and obscene know-nothing on the whims of a numbskull. Who cowered in green rooms, undercut, retrieving their speeches from wastebaskets and listening to the terrible thump of Trump through the wall. Who got their words twisted, regurgitated, returning to Joe Scarborough with a plan for keeping nursing home patients and prisoners safer, flattening the curve in New York. Who urged the closing of hotels and theme parks, paradise, church, shopping malls with their mannequins' torsos glowing night after night with dreams of capitalism. Now a waking nightmare of alcohol wipes, cock and endless balls no longer welcome in gentlemen's clubs, strippers shuddering, clouds of debt, no spinning on poles, no dollars, Canadian or American, all the motionless world of highways with no cars. Peter Pans playing solitaire on their iPods, plots and more plots dug up in cemeteries, drunken, safer-at-home moms and dads banging pans from windows and rooftops in honor of first responders who were busy at work, their kids home from school, storefronts boarded up, blinking traffic lights, ambulances, but not much else, sun and moon and tree vibrations in the spring dusks of Minneapolis and Louisville and Buffalo, until George Floyd, until the protests began, the best minds of the next generation chanting, demanding sanity from the worst King America, who is clearly out of his mind. And this next poem is a shorter poem. It's called Wednesday, April 29th, 1992. The first night of the Rodney King riots, my then boyfriend convinced me to stay home, though I wanted to go to the New Yorican Poets Cafe where there was a protest open mic. It could get violent, he said. Because I was somewhat self-actualized, I refrained from calling him a coward. Men, I thought, can be afraid too. I was confused as he seemed so much more political than I was. He could name all the American senators and battle dates that were smudges of scrambled time in my brain. He had lived through a coup in another country. He wasn't willing to join in demonstrations and earlier in the day predicted the looting that would happen in LA. I'm not blaming him, but blaming myself for not going alone, for all the times I've stayed quiet, tucked my neck deep in my collar, though revolution is just around the corner, the guillotine and third estate. My boyfriend and I stayed in playing Scrabble, feasting on vanilla Sara Lee cake. And this next poem is a sort of different tone, I suppose, but it's also inspired by another poet. And there's a poet whom I really love. Her name is Adelia Lopez, And she is a Portuguese poet who lives in Lisbon. She was born the same year as I was. There's only 10 of her poems translated into English, and I wish there were many, many more. And so Adelia Lopes is, as I said, Portuguese, but reads, unlike me, can read many languages. And she was influenced by Anne Sexton. She read Anne Sexton in English and I think in Portuguese as well. So that comes through in the poem as well. And she's also a very funny poet. And the lines I took from her are, "Such a beautiful day, and I'm not fornicating." Adelia Lopes. So I call this poem Fornicating. I have goosebumps from the breeze coming into the window, which is a kind of fornication, but who am I kidding? A breeze is not even a kiss, especially a breeze strained through a screen. I would have a better chance out on the street where I could perhaps meet someone who wanted to fornicate with me, or someone like me, and I could pretend, I suppose, even to be someone else, give a fake name so the man would never find me again. It is a little scary to say to a stranger, "Hey, do you want to fornicate?" Especially if you are a woman and you want to fornicate with a man. What kind of man would say yes to such a request? Maybe a violent one, maybe no decent man at all, since the request is pretty bold, and I suppose I would look crazy. Men are leery of crazy women, and I can't blame them. I could promise a man that I wouldn't stalk him or call him ever, that I am just in it for the fornication. But would he believe me? Even I don't really believe me. Because what if the fornication was a success, and I woke up the next morning, another beautiful day, and I wasn't satisfied with just the memory of fornication and wanted another round? Or what if it was lousy outside, and since I'd given a fake name, insisting I didn't want to know his, I had to look for a new fornicator, this time while lugging an umbrella. This time I could look for a woman with the same sad look I have when I want to fornicate. And if she agreed, we could step out of the rain into her apartment. It might not be as scary as approaching another man or as big a leap over a puddle. Anne Sexton wrote, "Once I was beautiful, now I am myself." Then Adelia Lopes wrote, "Once I was beautiful, now I'm myself." Then I wrote, "Fornication is for all the beautiful and unbeautiful selves on both beautiful and unbeautiful days." Not that I knew what I meant. It's just that sometimes it's easy to feel unbeautiful when you have unmet desires, or embarrassed that you have such desires at all. I once wrote about a lover who would pet his cat more than me, and my friend said, "This poem is too vulnerable. I feel as though I should throw a coat over this poem." She was right, of course, and I tore it up. I only remember it today because in her author's photo, Adelia Lopes holds a cat. I am allergic to cats. The lover had to wash his hands those many years ago before he could touch me. Kurt Vonnegut wrote that every character needs to want something, even if that something is only a glass of water. I want to fornicate. I get up from my chair and press my face against the cool screen until there is a dirty grid on my cheek, as though I slept in 50 tiny beds. And this next poem is called Kinky, and I'm reading it because it's from an old book, came out in 1997. All the poems were about Barbie dolls, feminist takes on Barbie. And Kinky turned 25 years old this month. So as a throwback, I thought I would read this. Kinky. They decide to exchange heads. Barbie squeezes the small opening under her chin, over Ken's bulging neck sockets. His wide jawline jostles atop his girlfriend's body, loosely like one of those nodding novelty dogs destined to gaze from the back windows of cars. The two dolls chase each other around the orange country camper, unsure what they'll do when they're within touching distance. Ken wants to feel Barbie's toes between his lips, take off one of her legs and force his whole arm inside her. With only the vaguest suggestion of genitals, all the alluring qualities they possess as fashion dolls up until now have done neither of them much good. But suddenly, Barbie is excited, looking at her own body under the weight of Ken's face. He is part circus freak, part thwarted hermaphrodite, and she is imagining she's somebody else. Maybe somebody middle class and ordinary, maybe another teenage model being caught in a scandal. The night had begun with Barbie getting angry at finding Ken's blow-up doll folded and stuffed under the couch. He was defensive and ashamed, especially about not even having the breath to inflate her. But after a round of pretend tears, Barbie and Ken vowed to try to make their relationship work. With their good memories as sustaining as good food, they listened to late-night radio talk shows, one featuring Dr. Ruth. When all else fails, just hold each other, the small sex therapist crooned. Barbie and Ken, on cue, groped in the dark, their interchangeable skin glowing, the color of Band-Aids. Then they let themselves go. Soon Barbie was begging Ken to try on her spandex miniskirt. She showed him how to pivot as though he were on a runway. Ken begged to tie Barbie onto his yellow surfboard and spin her on the kitchen table until she grew dizzy. Anything, they both said to the other's requests, their married desires bubbling from the most unlikely places. This next poem kind of is in that same vein of lookism, I guess I would say. And it's called Downsides, and it's back again from Second Story. And it's for Samantha Brick, who wrote an article called There Are Downsides to Looking This Pretty, Why Women Hate Me for Being Beautiful. And she published it in The Guardian on April 2nd, 2012. And you can imagine the backlash that ensued, including me. So this is my Downsides poem for Samantha Brick. Downsides. Seems I can't go anywhere without some dude trying to get inside my frontal lobe. Just once, I'd like to go to a hotel bar without hearing, nice brainstem, can I buy it a drink? Or, did anyone ever tell you your cerebellum? It could be a model. Whenever I pass a construction site, the hard hats whistle at my bouncy left and right hemispheres. As I scurry away, I get stuck up neocortex. At work, Mr. Smith ogles my limbic system, and the administrative assistants with the small brains ignore me in the lunchroom. I guess it's true. I flaunt my high IQ. I can be a tease when it comes to anagrams and spatial reasoning. But hey, don't we all use whatever we have? Unlike most women, I'm actually looking forward to senility, so everyone will stop seeing only my brain and accept me for who I truly am. This next poem, all right, so I'm going to go into like some forms just to prove to you that I can write in form. So this poem is called Conceptual Villanelle, and I guess most of the people are listening are poets who probably know the villanelle form, but for those of you maybe new to poetry or who may not know the villanelle, and there's a couple of really famous ones, but maybe the most famous one is the Dylan Thomas, do not go gentle into that do not go gentle into that good night, rage against the dying light. And it's Dylan Thomas like trying to get his father not to die. And so this poem is called Conceptual Villanelle, and this poem is about trying not to be born, I guess I would say. Okay, here we go. Conceptual Villanelle. You were never born, never conceived, but for my tame imagination, my worst traits coupled with a lover's genes. His ugly temper, my food allergies, no chance to rebel, prodigal son, since you were never born, never conceived. No daughter to replicate my pet peeves, no Snow White to hate me in the long run. I never coupled with another's genes, my vanity and insecurity, his bravado and love of Tommy guns. You were never born, never conceived. No cravings, no maternity leave. My oven never concocted a bun made of my worst traits and a lover's genes. You'll never be told, grow up, you're naive. You'll never be taunted, never be shunned. You were never born, never conceived. I cursed all my dates. I buttoned my jeans. And then I'm going to read two pantoums. I love pantoums, I think maybe my favorite of the received forms. And this one is called I Love Sex in All Its Forms. And I have a little story behind this poem, which is one day I had to go into my spam folder to get something that didn't reach me. And in my spam folder were all these like lovely ladies wanting to get, date me or whatever, pay money. They want me to pay money so I could see them, I guess. So I don't know how that happens, but the I Love Sex in All Its Forms caught my attention as the subject heading. And I immediately thought pantoum, which I know is not what Mindy meant. But anyway, so all the lines, it's a found pantoum. So all the lines actually were in the subject heading. So it's a found pantoum. I love sex in all its forms. Spam email from Mindy. Hey, big guy, I'm lonely and wet. Being in love, a blessing or a curse. My boner brew will make you a better screw. I just added 3 new naked photos. Being in love, a blessing or a curse. Text me, I guarantee we'll have a blast. I just added 3 new naked photos. Want to hear me talk dirty in my luscious British accent? Text me, I guarantee we'll have a blast. What should I do? I'm married, but only want you. Want to hear me talk dirty in my luscious British accent? Need a hot date with a sexy lady? What should I do? I'm married, but only want you. We don't have to explain ourselves to anyone. Need a hot date with a sexy lady? I'm gorgeous and only 2.8 miles away. We don't have to explain ourselves to anyone. Are you man enough to rock my world? I'm gorgeous and only 2.8 miles away. Here are some other girls you might like. Are you man enough to rock my world? I'll prove to you we're the perfect match. Here are some other girls you might like. Don't forget to leave space in your life for me. I'll prove to you we're the perfect match. Are you available, literally or metaphorically? Don't forget to leave space in your life for me. It's raining men, and I need one. Are you available, literally or metaphorically? My boner brew will make you a better screw. It's raining men, and I need one. Hey, big guy, I'm lonely and dry. And then this is
Denise.
Yes.
I'll pause and say, I hope anybody joining us in progress understands.
Yes.
I love what happens at a public library poetry reading, but that was one that made me laugh out loud when I read it in the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carry on.
Thanks. Yes, I should explain. If you came in like halfway through that poem, this is all, it's not me speaking. It's a whole bunch of emails that I received that wound up in my spam folder of women or probably bots, I don't know, but whoever, thinking I was a dude that wanted to date them. So I had a lot of fun sort of cutting and pasting those. So just to prove I can write a pantoum with my own words, without going to my spam folder, I thought I'd read this one. It's called Mother's Day Pantoum. Am I becoming my mother who tells the same story over and over? I don't stop her because she'd be embarrassed, and I like to see how the details change as she tells the same story over and over. In one version, my mother slams the phone. I like to see how the details change, that her sister, my aunt, apologizes because, after all, she'd slammed the phone on my poor mother, who was just trying to be nice. My mother's sister, my aunt, apologizes, but it sounds phony baloney to my poor mother, who was just trying to be nice. My aunt spread the rumor that my sister and I sold pot, but I thought it sounded phony baloney, made up by my cousin, who was the pothead. My aunt spread the rumor that my sister and I sold pot, so my mother sat us down, trying to get us to confess. My cousin was the pothead, his father, my uncle, always comparing our grades to his. When my mother sat us down, trying to get us to confess, my sister and I successfully defended ourselves. My uncle was always comparing our grades to his sons. Why can't you be smart like your 2 cousins? After my sister and I successfully defended ourselves, my mother felt bad for my cousin, who always heard, why can't you be smart like your 2 cousins? Maybe my mother offered parenting advice because she felt bad for her nephew who herded pretty girls around him to make him feel important. Maybe my mother offered parenting advice about the suicide attempt of his last girlfriend. Pretty girls around me made me feel less important, even though I was a good student. In some stories, the suicide attempt belongs to my cousin who hoped cannabis would help his depression. Maybe because we were good students, my sister and I didn't have a lot of dates in high school. Now I hope cannabis gummies will help with my neck pain. Pot's stigma in my mother's mind is almost gone. My mother didn't have a lot of dates in high school. She was a no-nonsense girl, the valedictorian of her class. The stigma of a smart girl's potential is now almost gone. Back then, her principal told her she could be a nurse or a teacher, even though my mother was the valedictorian of her class. The year was 1954, and she had only two choices. Her principal told her she could be a nurse or a teacher, and my mother chose nursing because she didn't like kids. The years were 1961 and 1962, and she had only two choices: have my sister and me, or go to hell for using birth control. My mother chose nursing because she didn't like kids, but then she had two daughters and loved us. My mother had two girls rather than use birth control. I went on the pill as soon as I could, but my sister had her own two daughters and loved being a mother. My cousin went on to become a successful businessman. I went on the pill as soon as I could, but my sister and I are now in menopause, no chance of more babies. My cousin went on to become a successful businessman who probably forgot all about how he tried to frame us. I am now in menopause, no chance of babies, and my mother asks if I have any regrets. My ex has probably forgotten about how he tried to frame me for the disaster that was our marriage. I'm afraid to ask my mother if she has any regrets, knowing she'll answer differently each time. I am even grateful for the disaster that was my marriage. I tell her I am grateful she had me, despite her ambivalence. I answer differently each time. My mother doesn't stop me because I'd be embarrassed. Maybe she is grateful she had me, despite her ambivalence. Maybe my mother is becoming me. And so my mom, I don't want to drop all my poems. My mom actually passed away this June, and so I wanted to read two short elegies for her. This first one is called Two More Purses, and I wrote it after the Gertrude Stein poem, Gertrude Stein piece of writing called A Purse. And Gertrude Stein wrote a purse. A purse was not green, it was not straw color, it was hardly seen, and it had a use, a long use, and the chain was never missing. It was not misplaced. It showed that it was open. That is all it showed. Two more purses. When my mother passed, I emptied her white purse, tissue pack and reading glasses, coupons and address book. I once lived in the purse inside her, my first pink home, the knotted strap and umbilical cord. When I grew up, I took care of my own purse, its pristine lining never stretched or stuffed with a fetus. I waxed the buckles, polished the pink clit, the tender button that opened and closed my clutch. I carried pleasure inside me, my lips keeping so many secrets. I tipped my mother's empty purse upside down, its vulnerable silk insides torn. And this is a tiny poem called Inheritance. My sister gives her grandsons the Cracker Barrel gift card my mother never got to use. They buy candy, Smarties, Cowtails, now and later, long-lasting chews. Then blow kisses up to their Gigi, who now lives beyond the cluttered ceiling in a gloriously retro heaven that smells like a Yankee seaside candle or maybe pancakes. And in closing, I'll read this last poem so that we have a little time for questions, if anyone has any questions. And this last poem is called Dear Memory. Dear Memory, What have you done with my keys? I blame you, though it's hard to hold a grudge these days because I usually don't remember why I was angry in the first place. I look at a person sure she's done me wrong, though the inciting incidents are lost. Former students seem familiar, but their names disperse like cigarette smoke, blowing towards a stool where I once drank myself sick. Now I'm not even sure what city that bar was in. The welcoming pink neon letters, another cloud, as though I am looking at tiny prints without my reading glasses. I was on a pink cloud when I first stopped drinking. In fact, I once looked up at the moon, weeping in gratitude. So there, I do recall something. I was walking across the Brooklyn Bridge in an ex's sweatpants, though I'm not sure anymore of his name or if I ever gave those sweatpants back. I'm usually halfway through a movie on Netflix when I realize I've already seen it. Probably in an old-fashioned freestanding theater, perhaps a matinee or a midnight screening, perhaps a popcorn bucket on my lap, that is, if I wasn't on some fad diet. Did I take my pain pill or not? I'm drinking water, but not sure I can detect that bad taste all the way back on my tongue. Maybe I have been drinking more water than I thought. Is it time to go to the gynecologist again? The office usually sends me a reminder postcard, but today I'm holding a letter from the breast center saying it's time again for my mammogram. I usually get a prescription from the gynecologist about a month beforehand. This is how it's been the last few years. I wonder if my doctor is retired or dead. I would call him, but I have forgotten his name. It begins with an S, and I think I remember the exit. I look through the stack of business cards I saved for moments such as this, but no card for him. I go to take out the recycling just moments after I took out the recycling. I stand at the fridge, its door ajar, the cold light bulb, an idea for a poem which I've also forgotten, a sublime dream that woke me in the middle of the night, a sublime dream I was sure I'd never forget. Ah, here is my key ring, but this gold one with the big square head, what lock could it possibly open? Thank you for listening. Thank you so much, Kathleen and John. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just wonderful to hear your work. When I read your poems and when I hear your poems, some of them just make tears come to my eyes and some of them make me laugh out loud. I love that.
Poetry's job, right? Thank you.
Yeah. I've always enjoyed your sense of humor in your poems, and that was true tonight too. And you read all my requests but one, so I might ask for it a little bit later. But sure. I love that you read Dear Memory. In my notes I was writing down, that reminds me of my own COVID brain as well as aging brain. Mm-hmm. During these years, it's just everything seems suspended, and I often can't hold on to a thought. So reading the poem and hearing the poem and going along with you just captures that. Thanks so well. And I'm going to ask you a couple of things, and then John will let us know if he's picked up some questions there at YouTube. I'm so glad that you read some of your poems that are in form. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and tell you too, in the poems like a villanelle or a pantoum that have repeating lines, I can see them and hear them. But I was reading your Hurricane Irma poem where the title even announces what I had lost track of. So Terza Irma is a long poem that seems like a hurricane diary. The hurricane is coming, you're getting ready, the hurricane happens, and there's some aftermath. But the hurricane had already happened while I'm reading it before I realized, wait, this is really, really tight rhyme. Wait, this is interlocking rhyme. Oh, wait, this is Terza Rima. And then I look back at the title, which is like, oh yeah, she's telling us that. So what you told us with the Mindy Pantoum, I Love Sex in All Its Forms, that that seeing a particular line struck you as, oh, I want to repeat that. You knew you wanted to make a pantoum out of that. Mm-hmm. What drew you to interlocking rhyme for your hurricane poem, or what draws you to that form, or what tends to draw you toward a form instead of a free verse poem?
That's a good question. I'll show you too. I mean, I can show I always want to read this poem, and it takes like over a half an hour, but basically, yeah, it's in terza rima, which is Dante's form, right? So it's very, I didn't cheat at all, like really tight, 9 syllables a line, whatever. So I had lived through this hurricane. In fact, this whole apartment was completely destroyed, and I had to rebuild it. It was pretty horrible. And I evacuated, as I describe in the poem, with 2 of my friends. And they were writers as well. And I had my notebook with me. And I was just, frantically writing every night because I really didn't know. I mean, I had a sense I was going to live, but I didn't know if Florida would be here when I came back. And a lot of it, it was pretty bad. So after the dust had settled and I kind of rebuilt and, tried to it took a really long time, right, to build everything back. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get my notebook because I bet I have some really interesting prose poems in there. And I just pictured like prose blocks. Well, I went back to my notebook and it was like some of the worst writing I'd ever seen in my life. And, like it was awful. And it was like, I'm going to die. Oh my God. It was just like, it was very histrionic and it was very like awful. So, but then there would be like 1 or 2 like images. And so I have in general, when I look at like free writing, I tend to, rather than crossing out things like, oh, you idiot, why did you write that? I'll take a highlighter, preferably like pink. And I just, kind of go over some like cool images. And I'm like, okay, you were a mess, but you did make this image. And so I built the poem. It's kind of like the Dear Memory. Like I had everything written down. So I knew what happened that day, but I had to rebuild, just the way I had to rebuild my apartment, like from the rubble. I had to rebuild. And I chose Terza Rima because it was like this hell, Dante's Inferno, right? So my hell was like watery, not fire, but very hellish nonetheless. And I just built the poem. So it went by day as a way to just kind of work on it. And it took a year to write. I worked on it like every day, and it still took a year to write because I would be like counting syllables, like using Rhyme Zone, or like I had to unravel the whole thing. If something didn't work, you'd have to go back. But it was so like a puzzle and like rebuilding. And there was something very satisfying about just, I'm going to make something beautiful out of this wreckage. It was, so it was, I've only read it once or twice because it's so long. For people to actually sit there, it's like a little memoir or something.
Right. Yeah. Oh, thanks for telling us about your process. I love hearing about the highlighting. I love hearing the rebuilding aspect because that's so much work, and so would this interlocking form be. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful to hear. I'm so sorry that you had to go through the experience.
It was pretty daunting.
Boy, wonderful poem came out of it.
I remember I studied with Thomas Lutz, may he rest in peace, and poetry, and he told us, our class once, he said, if you're ever having a fight with your boyfriend or your mom or something, just take it all in. You can use it for a poem later. And when he said it, I thought, oh, that's cold, but he's kind of right. Like, he was right, that you go through these terrible things, but you can sort of make something of them. Like you don't, like if you're not a writer, you just have to go through a terrible thing and let it go. But I guess maybe for a writer, part of letting it go is to try to write about it.
Yeah, and that's what, one reason I love Molly Peacock's work so much is she talks about that in order to write about the traumatic emotions of her life, she had to use tight forms to contain it, so it wouldn't take her over again. And so a way to contain it is also a way to let it go. So
correct. Yeah, correct. And make something like beautiful, or I guess like some people knit. It's like a way to just kind of make a pattern or something, right?
Yeah. And how you contained and let go of the frustration with the political scene in your Howl poem that you read for us tonight. And that's another thing I noticed in Second Story. Well, two things: that we had the elegies, the tender elegies, the personal poems, and then political poems that fit the time, and pandemic writing. And so a general question: how is it for you to write a poem that's overtly political or overtly activist, or climate activism, as in the climate crisis poem that's also a tender elegy? That's lovely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess even like going back to Kinky, that poem is oddly political, right? The Barbie dolls are like Band-Aids. They're like beautiful, but they don't have any personalities. And the whole book is, just vapid consumerism, so I think in some ways it's been my process, but I've been sort of sly, maybe like coming in sideways, and somehow maybe the pandemic and certainly George Floyd, I just thought no more pussyfooting around. I just couldn't make a metaphor. I'm like, this is too horrible for me, just my political stances. This is like, no, I have to just say it,
Yeah.
So I know some people feel, maybe less excited about political poetry or whatever, but I felt like I had to do it. I felt like it was my calling. I know it doesn't change anything really, but I keep thinking, 100 years from now, if the planet survives and someone picks up a book that was written in 2020, 21, or 22, and there's no mention of it, it's almost like, what were they doing? Are they just going to ignore that this is happening and write about their domestic squabble or whatever, the book's about? So I don't know. Even if it comes in, it's almost like I feel like if you're writing in a contemporary voice, to address it at least a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Not that it's a rule, but, I teach, and pretty much my students are all writing about it.
Yeah.
You can process it,
You're witnessing it in the time that you live. Poets pay attention. You're paying attention. You're writing it down. When I hear it, which is wonderful because I'm reading it and I hear you, it matches the straightforwardness, the honesty, the courage of all sorts that you've always had in your poems. So you're saying it. That's really wonderful. So John has let us know here in our little Zoom chat that you're getting some comments on YouTube. Wonderful contemporary feminist poetry. Yay!
Yay, thank you.
That we heard that. And my favorite parts of these readings are the clever and unexpected uses of common smudges of scrambled time. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was in the
yeah, so people
good.
Really enjoyed listening tonight. Personal and lovely poems, I agree. I felt the same way. I loved the nephew, Sestina. Sestina is another form, and that was one I loved. And I loved, so one of my requests is love poem number 6. It's on page 17.
Okay.
Are you sure it's a shorter one? Are you okay reading it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I have this printed out. I read. Oh. Yeah. I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Just read it now?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so this is a love poem. It's called Love Poem number 6. Is it cliche to say when we met, bluebirds flew out of my chest, or that I was ready to reach in and pull out my coward heart, throw it in a fry pan with onions? I would have rather been rid of it, not feel anything as I feared what would follow. Is it cliche to say wheels popped out of my heels so that I could roll to you faster than I could walk and roll away just as fast if I got scared? Is it cliche to say I was giddy like a kid? Is it cliche to say all good stories end in some kind of death, even if it's just the nerve endings that can't quite reach our hands, that tingle, then drop the forks we grasp? Ping of metal on kitchen tile, heart stew splattering, and I'm glad I feel nothing cleaning up the mess.
I just love that.
Thank you, thanks. I guess it's not really like it's not that really a love poem, is it? I fear a love poem, I suppose, you know?
Yeah. Is that in any kind of form that I just don't recognize? I like the repetition of.
No, I think it's just a list poem, right? And
okay.
Yeah, is it cliche to say? And of course it kind of is, you know, but it was a way to get out of saying it. Yeah. Funny. Yeah, I love lists of all kinds. I love a good list poem.
And poems that ask a question or repeatedly ask a question or repeat an initial phrase. I just rolling along with you. And
it's almost like the syntax gives you permission to go out on a limb for a little bit, then pull back, go out on a limb and pull back. You know, you don't, like in a narrative poem, you get, you know, you're halfway through, you kind of have to finish the story, you know, but if it's in a list, there's not that same, it's a different kind of pressure, I guess.
Yeah. Now, at the very beginning, I mentioned that some of your books are collaborations. Would you tell us a little about how you work when you work with a collaborator? What's different about working alone, and maybe what brought you into that kind of experience?
Yes. Well, one of my favorite poets is a poet named David Trinidad, who writes a lot of pop culture. He has this great book, Plastic Bill and The Late Show. I mean, a lot about movies, and he has his own take on Barbie dolls. It was fabulous. And I went to see him read in, I want to say late 1980s in New York, and, you know, just as fanning out or whatever in the front row. And then he said, now I'm going to read with my friends. And this guy comes up on the stage, and they had a little chapbook called Taste of Honey. The friend was named Bob Flanagan, who has since passed, I believe. And anyway, they were really a very different voice than just David alone. And so, of course, I bought the book, you know, immediately and had him sign. I don't think I really knew him yet. I just kind of hovered around the table. And I called my best friend, Maureen Seaton, and I said, I just heard this thing. I can't quite describe it, but they're writing together and blah, 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 blah. And I said, do you want to do it? And she's like, why not? And so we just started doing one line at a time, back and forth on answering machines, basically, because this was before email or text or any of these things. And we would write them down and then, you know, just kind of go along. And then after a few poems, we did some research and we found out about Exquisite Corpse, which we hadn't even known about. And that's when you fold the paper, so you only see the half of the other person's lines. And then Maureen, I think the reason I love form so much is because of Maureen, because I was writing these long, you know, my lines never fit on a piece of paper. They were always like wraparound lines. And that made her so anxious because she had studied with Marilyn Hacker, and I mean, Maureen can write a sonnet in her head. I mean, it's just like the way she thinks. So she said, well, can we try sonnets? And I'm like, I don't think I can do that. And she's like, just try it. And writing sonnets and pantoums and villanelles with her, you know, awoke my own, you know, kind of wanting to try forms on my own. And then Maureen's now like the queen of the prose poem. She has a book that's all in prose poems. So I think we just kind of did these projects together that were so much fun, but then also ultimately like informed each other's own work as well. So I would recommend collaboration to anyone, really. I mean, you have to find the right collaborator. You can't collaborate with someone you don't know well, or someone who's a bully, or someone who's just like going to cross out all your ideas or whatever. But if you have the same temperament, it's really fun. And collaborating with kids is a blast.
Oh, yay.
They're up for it. They're up for anything.
Yeah.
And they come up with really good images. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I think it's also releases the pressure of, oh, it's got to be perfect. It's got to, because you can edit it after, but there's also just this generating quality. It's really fun.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about that. I think that was the first time I heard you read. You must have been in Chicago visiting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you do a reading together?
Yes, we did.
That was it. That's when
it was probably Women in Children first, right? Probably.
I think so.
Oh, I love that store so much.
Yeah. So great. So we've been here with Denise Duhamel tonight at Poetry is Normal Presents. We're so glad to have you. Thank you for being with us. Thanks so much to the Normal Public Library Foundation for supporting this programming. And it was wonderful to have you here from Miami, Florida. Thanks to you too. And a big thanks to John Fisher at the Normal Public Library for arranging for this broadcast. If you happen to join us in the middle, it will be archived and you can see it at the Normal Public Library YouTube channel there from the beginning. Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you, Kathleen. It was such a pleasure. And thank you to the library. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, John. Bye.
Looks like we're